Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Tucker went to Russia. He talked to Putin. We're going to show you a couple clips here, and let's start with a bit on why Putin says he's going into Ukraine now and not 22 years ago.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
Да. Итак, значит, советская Украина получила.
The Soviet Union was given a great deal of territory that had never belonged to it, including the Black Sea region.
Когда Россия их получила в результате.
Do you believe Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine, and that other nations have a right to go back to their 1654 borders?
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders. But given Stalin's time, so-called Stalin's regime, which, as many claim, saw numerous violations of human rights and violations of the rights of other states,
в этом смысле, конечно, вполне можно, если не говорить о том, что они имеют на это право.
One may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs while having no right to do that. It is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Никогда не говорил.
Never. I have never told him, not a single time.
Okay, so I want to get into some of the specifics about redrawing maps and picking years that we can always go back to, 1654 in this case, and all of those things. But first, I thought for a moment we could talk about just kind of the media reaction and the general reaction related to Tucker doing this in the first place. Karol, you are an actual journalist. I didn't have to use air quotes there. It was very refreshing. Are you somewhat shocked at the reaction to Tucker doing this, even before the clips had been released? I mean, basically everyone's saying he's now just a Russian stooge and all that kind of stuff.
Well, not everyone's saying that, right? The people who hate Tucker are saying he's a Russian stooge. The people who love Tucker are saying he's the greatest journalist, to ever journalist. I want to just quickly, before I get into that, correct everybody's sharing that clip with an incorrect translation. I speak Russian.
Oh,
he does not say the Soviet Union was given land that does not belong to it. He says Soviet Ukraine, which is a giant difference. And I feel like, I don't know, every time I see it on Twitter, I'm like, somebody's going to correct it, because you could hear him say Sovietsky Ukraine. It's not Soviet Union. So he's saying that Ukraine gained this land, and that is now he has to kind of recapture it. But, the whole thing is that I hate how all the opinions were out before we saw any clips.
Mm-hmm.
What you were saying about the media. They hate Tucker Carlson, therefore they oppose this interview, or they love Tucker Carlson and therefore they support this interview. I was kind of mixed on it. I am, again, born in the Soviet Union. I don't feel a lot of love for Vladimir Putin, and I kind of feel nervous about getting a softball interview with him. But I don't really think that that's what happened here. I think that this was... It wasn't a particularly newsy interview. I don't think that we're going to remember very much about it, but I didn't think it was softballs. And I think that it was good to wait to see what actually happened.
No, I agree. I don't think it was a softball interview. Look, I think we do have to acknowledge that Putin himself is a former, or I suppose current to some extent, KGB agent. So he might be manipulating Tucker and the viewing public to some extent. But Gad, I think you're fairly on the side of more conversation and more knowledge is better. We have a little more insight into his thinking now, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was struck by, I couldn't, maybe Karol can comment on this. When Tucker asked him, have you reached out to Viktor Orban and advised him? Obviously, he was using his beautiful sarcastic delivery. And it seemed, so I'm not sure if, Putin was being manipulative by pretending that he didn't get the sarcasm, or whether it really flew over his head. I just thought that was such a beautiful moment, because in looking at it, it seems as though he didn't get the sarcasm, because he answered, oh, no, I've never spoken to Viktor Orban about it. But regarding this idea of whom we should speak to or not, and since we're talking about Tucker, I've had a cousin with whom I went through the Lebanese civil war. So we've had very intense moments together, disown me publicly on Twitter because I had appeared on Tucker's show. So this not only happens apocalyptically amongst people who say, how can you speak to Tucker? How could you speak to Putin? It even happens with family members. So it's an ugly reflex. And of course, I condemn it.